we have two great speakers. We have Chris Magwood, the Director of Research at Builders for Climate Action, and Jacob Racusin, Director of Building Science and Sustainability at New Frameworks. And in this presentation, we'll hear from both of them about a critical look at practices that have endeavored to embed justice and belonging alongside their goals for health, efficiency, and sustainability in buildings. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Jacob, who'll take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let me share my screen. Stand by just a moment. All right, just you can see our screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. So let's do some quick self-introductions to build on that wonderful introduction. My name is Jacob Racusin. I'm with New Frameworks. I also work with Builders for Climate Action along with Chris. We have been working, we'll explain more about our work at the course of the presentation, but have been working in the intersection of ecological and social action in the built environment for just about 20 years now, maybe not quite. I guess you'll learn a lot more about this in the context of the presentation. But, it's an honor to be here. Chris, want to share anything about yourself there?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just chime in and say hi to everybody, and thanks for joining us. My name's Chris Magwood. I sort of do a bit of hat juggling. I work for RMI in their carbon-free buildings team, and then I sort of also flip on my Builders for Climate Action hat from time to time, and so I wear both those hats. And yeah, I think we'll kind of dive in. You'll sort of learn more about the work we do and how we're approaching this topic as we go.
So we have some learning objectives here, but we're not going to take the time to read them all right now. Feel free to follow up with us for a copy of the slide deck if you'd like to learn what you're expected to learn here. But let's get right into the meat of it, because we have a fair amount to cover. So really love starting this presentation with this photo, because it really sort of embodies a lot of the sort of the core philosophy around our shared work here. So we have presented this in the past with my colleague at New Frameworks, Ace McCarlton, who unfortunately wasn't able to join us for this round. But that's Ace's youngest kiddo, Elio, sitting on one of the prefabricated straw panels that our company builds with the team there. And it's indicative because there's a really, like, it embodies both the motivation, the sort of the what compels us to be doing this work, as well as sort of the opportunities we see in engaging in climate action work in buildings, sort of in this photo here. I at this point do not feel like I any longer need to convince anyone that we are in climate crisis or identify what the symptoms of that are, between record wildfires and record high temperatures and record flooding and so on and so forth. That's all, very evident to all of us at this point, I'm trusting. What is becoming increasingly evident within the last year or so, and particularly this summer, is that we're no longer just worried about faraway ecological impacts for polar bears losing habitat at the poles of the planet, but this is landing very directly in all of our communities and impacting the human experience and social experience very directly. And so I think we're all having much more tangible lived experience of our connection to ecological systems and the impacts there and our relationship with those systems. So in looking at the why of climate justice, we need to sort of start by sort of defining, to know what climate justice is, we need to look at what climate injustice is and the injustices that are associated in this work. And so what we're finding is that the impacts of the climate crisis on human society are falling along the same inequitable lines of the inequalities within our current systems, around economy and political access and so on and so forth. And so to that end, we're seeing climate crisis as a threat multiplier of where we're already seeing the social vulnerabilities that are sort of cutting across categories of race and gender and age, so on and so forth, are being accelerated by the climate impact. And so accordingly, in recognizing that those that are frequently had the least traditionally to contributed the least to the causation of climate crisis and are already suffering inequitably from economic and social oppression within our society, are also now on the disproportionate receiving end of the impacts of climate crisis. I've seen that play out in this past couple of weeks in Vermont. We've been inundated with record catastrophic flooding, and also seeing those that are on the lower strata of economic income and access are suffering most greatly in terms of their recovery prospects. And so, recognizing those dynamics really compels us to address them in the process of addressing the climate crisis writ large. And so I think the thing we can say is that this is not a technocratic issue of a chemical imbalance in the atmosphere, and we just need to rectify some technological solutions to right that. If we're doing that within the existing inequitable system, then we're going to not only miss critical parts of the system that needs to be healed and addressed, we're actually not going to be able to functionally do the work of addressing the climate crisis without also doing work of addressing social inequities and the social justice issues that are directly associated. So for us, climate justice is really looking at the direct relationship between our human experience and ecological sort of basis within which we're operating here. And the mechanism there of taking action and doing some of this healing work is through the development of positive relationships. And the relationship building feels like really at the core of what it means to heal both the climate crisis and the justice issues that are sort of fully interwoven there. For if we're only looking at again, the technological elements of that, we really lose some of the major opportunities we have in the midst of this disruption, which I think I would like to think we're all recognizing how disruptive this moment is, just even within our industry, let alone within this larger period of reorganization around, electrifying buildings and relocalization of some of our economies, so on and so forth. There is tremendous opportunity within that reorganization for us to not just try to do less harm within an existing exploitative and extractive system, but to really lean into centering these priorities around justice as we are reorganizing where energy comes from and who has access to what quality housing, so on and so forth. And so from looking at it from that vantage and seeing the social and ecological issues as being interwoven, and the recognizing that the same mechanisms of economy and society that have externalized impacts to ecological systems and allowed us to create the climate crisis in the first place are some of the same sources that have kept us alienated and disenfranchised and out of relationship with each other, and allow for exploitation and marginalization within our society. Recognizing some of the common roots to that mentality shows that for the opportunity to lean in heavily to the rebuilding of relationships with each other and with our ecological systems hold some common ground in how we can not just do less harm, but actually proactively heal from these combined crises.
So I'll step in here. This illustration was actually something that our colleague Ace came up with kind of after we had built out this presentation, and I think it's really sort of informative, and it has some animations that Jacob's going to sort of pop us through as we go, but. The sort of the way that we organize, not just the construction industry, but because that's what we're talking about, that will sort of be the focus. That's sort of like the normal industry. We kind of see it as existing as a whole. It has a boundary, and everything that we do today, sort of business as usual, kind of fits in that little circle. And then if you just want to kind of click through, we won't pause on each of these. You can kind of click through them, but all of these things that are starting to sort of be more and more identified now as things that the construction industry needs to think about, they still kind of, it's like, here's this circle and here are all these things outside this circle, and how do we try to make connections, out to these other circles, or to bring these other circles, closer, or sort of in more direct relationship with that construction industry. And that's great for sort of being able to identify what are the things that that some of the things that Jacob just identified, like who are the people who have been left out, what are the sort of the opportunities and the inequities that exist, and sort of, so we can identify them around that frame of the normal construction industry. But then ACE did this great thing, and if you click through again, Jacob, of basically saying, like, we need to redraw that so that, instead of all of these externalities being sort of outside the industry, outside our normal thinking, and sort of needing consideration to sort of connect with, or sort of make allowances for, or exceptions for, I think this whole presentation is about trying to redraw this circle so that it includes those things, so that construction practice isn't, I design and build buildings, and then sometimes I think about, climate change, or sometimes I think about earth and ecology, or, people who've been excluded from this industry. It's like, trying to redraw the circle to include all of these issues that really are all part of, our built environment, all part of our society, of which the built environment is such an important part. And so, we all have attempts to make these connections. I wouldn't say that I feel like, oh, I've completely redrawn that circle and my practice includes all of these things flawlessly. Absolutely not. But we'll kind of get into a bit about, our attempts to redraw that circle in this presentation.
So bringing that into looking at some of the systems and structures that can kind of model out for the systems change we're looking at. Chris and I both have a strong background and a really strong belief in the link between agriculture and construction, particularly looking at bio-based materials and agricultural residues as a key strategy for storing carbon in the built environment and reducing the emissions of buildings. And that, just looking within agriculture, I find a really useful model of on a systems level of what what this organization around relationships, either within the circle or externalized in the circle, sort of produces. And looking at the left, more of a conventional approach towards agricultural production, what is valued is essentially profit at the end of the day, but really ultimately the maximum output of marketable crops at the minimum investment. And issues around ecological impact, pollution, migrant labor exploitation, sort of land use impacts in greater regions are all externalized from that equation and therefore aren't managed or valued for. And the result is a whole lot of human exploitation and suffering that often falls along class and racial lines, as well as depletion of soil tilth and fertility and groundwater resources and and rampant amounts of pollution, so on and so forth, where the relationships are largely extractive or exploitative and somewhat transactional, with a very narrow definition of what is valued coming out of the system. You can contrast that directly with more of a regenerative agricultural approach to the right, where the goal is actually fundamentally around amplifying and optimizing the number of interdependent relationships within the system. And that's what produces the best opportunities for resiliency in the face of weather and climate related disruptions and anomalies, which can create a maximum number of outputs across multiple different types of species. There's greater value in more life that is more symbiotically organized, and there's a very different sort of equation and valuation of all the participants within the system, of which humans are managers or participants or co-creators, if you will, within that system. And the focus there being on the values or the primacy of relationships being centered in the goal of the system. And so using, that I find to be an incredibly helpful model in orienting, like, what does this look like in practice? Because this can be a little more difficult to map that out in the context of building A versus building B. It gets to be a little more difficult to sort of see that quite so clearly. The thing that really resonates for me is that when I sort of feel what my response is to, like, looking at the system on the left versus looking at the system on the right, it's pretty visceral. Like, I have a pretty direct response to that. And when I was talking through the development of this with Ace and Chris, months ago, sort of realized that it is not just some what's the word, like, utopia that we can hopefully someday imagine that we could live in a situation like we have on the right. It's quite literally our birthright as humans on the planet, as part of this ecological system, to have a shelter in society that is a generative and in positive relationship and that isn't inherently exploitative and extractive. And it's not some novel fantasy. We have done this as a species repeatedly and consistently throughout time and across the planet in different societies. This is not something that is some utopian fantasy. This is something that is within our right to demand as part of an ecological system living on the planet, that we can organize in a way that is safe and respectful. And so I would like for that to be some of the charge here, because it can be really difficult to see how we migrate from our current system and structure into the one that we're seeing represented on the right. But it's not some highfalutin idea of something that horizon we walk towards. It is something we need to reclaim that is inherently ours. And coming at it from that angle really reframes for me what our strategies and actions are towards addressing the climate crisis, as it not just trying to improve upon and mitigate the harm caused by the system on the left, but to actually transition to the system on the right. And that's more of a systems level transition than just taking a series of actions that are just harm mitigation within an inherently extractive system. And so bringing that back into what that means and connecting that to direct action and direct sort of systems organization within the built environment, just explaining this little infographic. On the left, we're looking at a forest ecological system, out of which resource flows can be directed towards a manufacturing facility for making building products. We also see an agricultural system in the middle here with a electric powered tractor. So we're working with these systems to gain resources or have a material flow that can be directed towards some renewably powered and low emission manufacturing to create bio-based buildings that will, in concert with these ecological systems, to store carbon in our buildings and create low net carbon infrastructure. That's the goal. And I think the part of the pattern here that's really important to name in the distinction between doing less harm versus doing proactive good and what it means to be in relationship. Traditionally, if there's one thing that I really have found some benefit in coming out of the pandemic era, is that we all understand what supply chains are now in a way that we never did. I would say as specifiers, we used to just think of products, and now we understand that products come from materials, and those materials come from places. And so historically, is where we as an industry and a tremendous consumer of materials coming from places, we've said, we need these products, make these products for us and we will buy them, which puts undue burden and pulls us out of the relationship from the basis from which those materials are actually generated, and allows the externalities of massive plumes of emission into the atmosphere, so on and so forth. And what we're suggesting here is that we look at what it means to have well-managed forest and agricultural systems and identify what are the resource flows that come out of those well-managed, resilient, generative, respectful, relationship-bound systems. And how do we build built infrastructure from those materials? It's one reason why Chris and I have been working with straw so effectively for so long, is we recognize there is an abundance of this material that comes at a very low ecological impact that can be transformed into a range of very high performance building materials. We're not leading saying we need insulation made out of straw. We're leading from, we want to be in relationship with the land base that provides the materials that we need for our buildings, there's a lot of straw. That's going to work really well for our needs. And so that is the type of reorganization of our relationship with these resource flows and these ecological bases from which we are getting the materials we need for our buildings. That is more dialogue and relationship than just unilaterally demanding or, again, extracting what we need to do the things that we think that we want.
Okay, so that's the framing and the background, and as always, Jacob says all that stuff very eloquently. Thank you for that. I was at first we have done this presentation a few times now, and I was actually a bit hesitant to join on at first because I wasn't convinced, and still I think need convincing that I am doing this. And I'm really, thankful to Jacob and Ace for sort of, showing me the ways that often unintentionally that I was sort of, working from a notion of sort of justice and restoration in what I was doing, even if it wasn't necessarily explicit. And I'm hoping that, these examples that we're going to show you kind of open the same kind of pathway for you. It's like, because I definitely know when I hear these large concepts of climate justice, it's like I get panicked and overwhelmed, and I don't know how to fix that. I don't know how to do that. Like, what role do I have? How can I possibly, be doing something meaningfully or meaningful, in this way? And so, what we want to do is kind of show you in 3 different rounds things that we've done in our practice that definitely doesn't sort of solve these issues. It doesn't, this isn't the end point for any of us, but what we did was sort of look at our practice and thought, like, what have we done so far to sort of to undertake some of this and to sort of make it fundamental to our work. And so we're going to sort of present these opportunities we saw, a solution we tried, and the sort of like new frameworks and Builders for Climate Action kind of approach to doing that. They are far from in-depth case studies. They're really just sort of a snapshot to make you think about how this could work for you. So they're not prescriptions, they're kind of suggestions, and hopefully just a door opening, not like a go home and sort of to-do list way of approaching this. So in our first sort of round here, we're going to look at the sort of the human side of things, like building teams for climate justice. How do you, in the work of being involved in making buildings, whether you're on the design end or the permitting end or the construction end, like, the humans that we're in relationship with are so important to all of this. And so we'll kind of look at that, acknowledging that climate justice is a movement, and movements are based on people. And so we're going to start here with people and how our different practices have gone about sort of finding and working with people. And so we are going to, I'm going to sort of give you a bit of the story of my own career, really, which I was highly fortunate to be involved in building the first straw bale permitted straw bale house here in Ontario back in 1996, so quite a while ago now. And in doing that, I started a partnership with 2 friends, Tina Terrian, who's up there in the top left, and Pete Mack. And after building my house, we started a small design build company doing straw bale construction. And by sort of her own personality, Tina's presence in that company, really set me on a great path, because her sort of approach to construction, she was really, well, I keep saying was, like she's not around. She is, really thorough, really cares about details, very organized person, but also on the job site and in all her interactions, just like one of those people who's fully human and joyful in all of her, interactions and relationships. And the way that she was able to sort of upend the sort of a lot of the norms of construction site relationships by being herself was great. It immediately broke down barriers that made the fact that what we were doing was considered unusual. Like it instead of being in opposition to a lot of people, permit offices and other contractors and stuff, the way that she just talked to people and included people and sort of like joyfully invited them into what we were doing was amazing and also really successful. I think that's also important to think about, that her approach it wasn't just like cool that she did this. It actually is what made our business successful. People liked working with us. Our clients enjoyed us. Everybody had a good time when they were working with us. And I think, that really set me on a path to seeing how a construction site could be a place of really great human interaction. And, due to that success, we very quickly found ourselves in a position where there were more people asking for our services than we were able to provide. But we were very happy in our position as, running a small company where we all had small managerial roles, but also, were on site and doing things hands-on at the same time. And we didn't want to grow into a large construction company. So we decided, very early on that our approach to helping the work itself grow was to bring people into our company, train them, but then encourage them to, leave us and start their own companies. So essentially, training our own competitors to then go out and do more of the same work, but as individual businesses, and obviously with strong alliances, because we build lots of personal relationships as we do that. And in doing that, we also, we're intentionally choosing to work with people who came from outside conventional construction backgrounds. I think because all of us started as sort of construction industry outsiders, and because we were sort of a woman-led company, having women and Indigenous and queer and trans folks, be part of what we were doing, be the people we intentionally brought into the company to sort of learn from us and then go on, was really important. And we hope, the idea was that we could embed not just this technical knowledge of how to do this particular kind of instruction, but embed that ethic of sort of sharing, teaching, and growing a movement for people and climate. And quite a number of the companies that sort of got their start there are still out there and doing really great work. And the websites that I've kind of screenshot here are just a few examples of that. Now I'll turn it over to you, Jacob, for new frameworks.
Thanks, Chris. I love hearing your story. Yeah, so I will speak for the new frameworks side of things here. And I'm going to represent a little bit of ACE's story. ACE is the OG founder of new frameworks, along with the partner Chloe Changiani, and I joined in a couple of years later. ACE started new frameworks as a queer trans person coming out of the commercial trades in California, and bore like direct witness to the just the sort of violence and harm and just deeply unhealthy culture around the trades, particularly the commercial trades, that was not only ACE as a queer person was subjected to, but really a whole bunch of white cis men were self-harming and harming each other with drugs and sarcasm and self-abuse and sort of self-exploitation and being exploited as laborers on large job sites, so on and so forth. And at the same time, that was all mixed in. It tells this great story, but seeing all of that mixed in with the sort of like craft and pride and love of creating buildings, which holds this tremendous wealth of empowerment and pride and the duality of that was really intense. So for ACE, it was a real sort of mandate to have the construction process be one that is empowering and uplifting, and also creates a literally a space for all people, including cis white men like myself, and also queer and trans folk, and women, and people of all creeds, to be able to enter into the trades in a healthy and safe way. So that's kind of the core and the sort of the DNA of New Frameworks comes from that space. I can speak for myself. I, as a sort of a nerdy liberal arts kid that was trying to get into the trades and learn some skills around construction, I was deeply intimidated to join conventional carpentry crews, and it was through working with natural materials that felt like there was less of a formal culture and playbook around, combined with a culture that was very sort of deeply caring and relationship forward, that made it a lot easier for me. I'm ill convinced that I ever would have entered the trades were it not for meeting up with that community. And so that's kind of the roots of New Frameworks. And we've been working, so there's this from our inception, it has been this melding of being in a relationship with each other and creating broader and more healthy relationships for humans in the context of construction, mixed with our deep care for and relationship with the natural environment. And our work with straw and timber and earth was very much around ecological impact, but also deeply around relationship with place and having direct connections with, we would harvest clay out of the ground, and to some extent still do, working with direct earthen materials, working with straw produced right within our communities and investing back into our communities. We where those materials are sourced, similar with our wood products and timber products. And developing those relationships with people working within place and with our regional landscape is a core part that just melded right in with the social fabric of our company. And so zooming ahead about 15 years or so, as our process of custom residential construction was developing, and realizing, one, that it was very difficult to hit some of our social mandates of access to housing, because it's just so incredibly expensive to build these custom individual single residential buildings. We really needed to find more ways to be able to accelerate this practice, both to allow just to get more straw into more buildings and increase our reach, but also to increase the access to our buildings. And so we started working with panelized straw as a mechanism for doing that. And Chris was actually an enormous support for us in both the technological and business development of the panel part of our company. And as we're developing that out, we saw an opportunity there to not just leverage a new technology to get more units of straw into buildings, but to continue to create more access to more people, both into the trades and also to direct where those panels would be heading. And so we partnered with an organization, Migrant Justice, which is a membership-based immigrants' rights and agricultural justice organization in Vermont, to sort of pilot the development of a worker co-op and trades training initiative, and hired some of our staffing from within that community. In the process, and that was really important to us, partially because in Vermont, we are really heavily dependent on the dairy industry, which is the links there, and what's is one of the most exploitative industries from labor practices that we still have in our region, and it's also the basis from which our primary agricultural products of straw and grain production are sort of rooted within this larger ecosystem. So it felt really important to intervene there and develop those relationships and connections and see about doing some healing within that space. And so we've been really involved with that community and with that organization, and through that process, New Frameworks has sort of transformed into a bilingual company as part of our initiative around language justice, to make sure that within both the design and the construction sides, that everyone can participate fully in the process, regardless of what their first language is. And it's been a really impactful process for us as a cooperative to develop within that context. It's also been really meaningful for us to And we'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk in the third round around scale, but to look at what is a manufacturing facility and at what scale, what level of technological development has access to that technology became a really important part of the development of this as well. And I know I've mentioned it a few times, but just to call it out specifically, the investment in the people that are still caretaking the working landscape of our region is also incredibly important. So you have a photo there of Dave Kenyon, who's a 8th generation farmer in the Champlain Valley. And we had an option of different insulation materials we could have leaned into for panelized construction. And one version of that would be to invest our market power into multinational petrochemical companies. And another is to invest in multi-generational Vermont family farmers and to provide another market for them, whose other market is providing organic grain and food for our region. And so being able to help bolster up smaller regional food resiliency and food shed within our region becomes yet another set of relationships. It's another value that we can bring to the table. It's another value behind our work that again is not only held in metric in the cost per installed R value of the panel, but also where those dollars are invested into local economy, into how they're supporting this larger fabric of systems that are caretaking land and providing food resilience for our communities and so on and so forth. All of that becomes part of the web of relationships and value of the investment beyond just the service value of the panel inside the building. Okay, so we want this to be ultimately our goal, and you didn't really get through all the learning objectives because we want to get to the meat of it, but our intention is you leaving here to have some, to be one step further along the path of realizing climate justice within your own practices. And so rather than just barreling through a whole bunch of different information, we want to stop and pause and give an opportunity for you to do some reflection here and see how you can find yourself within this work. And so at the end of each of these 3 rounds, we're going to take just a couple of minutes and we're going to embrace the potential awkwardness of Zoom silence and use it as an opportunity to do a little bit of reflection. We're going to answer one of these prompts. And for those of you who feel comfortable, to please place your answer into the chat and share back out with the rest of the group. And I'll just read these out loud. So within the next 6 months, in the very near/immediate term, opportunities to grow my team or partnerships include some skills I need to develop to successfully build a diverse team are resources that I can use to support myself and or my team are or local or regional groups that I can build relationships with to help me grow my team could be. So set a little time here. So you go for just a couple of minutes and share your thoughts in the chat. Share your inspiration. Go for about another 30 seconds or so. Finish up some thoughts, and please, if you feel comfortable, share them out. Caroline, thank you for bringing that to the chat. All right. Thanks. Chris and I talked about this in the past. It's actually like really refreshing to pause in the midst of what can otherwise be a bit of a fire hose of presentation that you've all grown accustomed to online. So
Yeah,
thanks for that.
interesting too. I'll just say, like, every time we take this pause and I look at these prompts, like, I rethink them and I come up with new answers. It's been really helpful to take that 2 minutes and just go, oh yeah, that, like, I didn't stop to, think this through since the last time that we presented this, and it's really helpful.
That's awesome. I love that. All right, well, feel free to keep sharing, but let's move on to our second round here. So we looked at the relationships with people and people being at the center of this movement, and now we're going to look at our relationship with Earth and some of the different ways, which is maybe a little more closer to home for some of us working in the carbon reduction space, what it means to be in right relationship with Earth through our practices. Chris, take us away.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I think maybe we will, or some of us anyway, will find ourselves on more sort of more regular footing here. But again, sort of to sort of continue my own story a bit. By 2005, the design build company had sort of split and become a design build company that Tina and Pete continued on, and also became a design build school that I spent the last 15 years of my life sort of working on. And we really centered the community side of that in the school. So when I talked about bringing people from different backgrounds, typical non-trades type backgrounds, into the company, with the school, we were able to do that, more people from more backgrounds. And so, by sort of reaching out to lots of folks who wouldn't normally be reached by a trades program, we were able to build, really diverse teams of students. But we brought those students together to really think about the relationship between, the planet and our buildings. And so we kind of always had a number of goals that were all centered on that. Things that are familiar to the language of the building world: net zero energy, net zero embodied carbon, zero toxins, zero waste. All of those are sort of like ways that we try to really measure how we not only minimized our impacts on the earth, but could we sort of have positive repercussions for the planet in doing this work. So we had done that for a number of years, and then in 2017, and I love to sort of redraw the circle thing that we started with, that Ace gave us, because in sort of thinking about redrawing that circle, we wanted to do a few things. Redrawing a circle to consider what happens after we're finished making this building. So much of the attention in our professional careers was like, to get this building done in the best possible way, but with very little thought about what happens to this building, after we make it. And so part of redrawing that circle was to think about, like, how do we help people live in these buildings, over the long term? How do we help the buildings survive better in the long term? How can they be modified and repaired with sort of little or no cost? How do we give people the asset of the materials that are in the building, instead of sort of giving them something that's there in one form, but if they want to change the form, they have to create a bunch of waste and then buy new materials. So that really led us to thinking about design for disassembly. And so this project in 2017 was an attempt to make a building that we had been doing sort of panelized, wall and roof and floor construction for a while, but could we take that and make it so those pieces could be put together and taken apart really easily, and all the things that went with them? Could the mechanical systems be very easy to fix and change out? Could the finishes be dismountable and reusable? And so, we set about doing this project to do that, and to kind of prove out, whether our theory was working in practice. We actually made this little demo building that we built here at our base in Peterborough, Ontario. Then we completely took it down and set it up at a design show in Toronto, so a lot of people could sort of see it and tour it. And then we completely took it down and put it up again on a client's site. And so that was sort of an attempt to, again, sort of broaden that circle of, yes, we can store some carbon in these, in these panels, but what if that piece has a life, that goes beyond the life of the building? What if the finishes that we put inside the building, can come down and go into another building later on? All of that was a way to try to redraw the circle to keep kind of carbon storing materials in use for longer, but also to to make it easy for somebody to live in this building. If you look at the picture in the bottom left, that all of that that wood paneling inside the building, it's all the things. It's formaldehyde free. It's got all these great qualities, but it's also surface mounted, and you can take those panels off. You can change some wiring behind them. You could change it to a different kind of panel, but the piece remains viable, and that's why we wanted to put the building up and take it down a bunch of times to show that these materials potentially have 2 or 3 lifespans in them, compared to the way we normally do things, which is put up a great building, but essentially everything in the building is sort of garbage before it can become anything else. So that's my little slide on thinking about how to sort of recenter the relationship with the planet and the materials that we use from it.
Great. So I'm going to talk about a project that we have been working on for a while. It's you're the designers and panel providers for program center, as well as a duplex for Soulfire Farm. I've been doing mechanical and enclosure consulting with them for a very long time. Soulfire Farm is an Afro-Indigenous centered community farm that's committed to uprooting racism and seeding sovereignty in the food system. So at work in both outreach into communities where there are food deserts and food insecurity, as well as providing training facilities for aspiring farmers, primarily Afro-Indigenous folk, getting reconnected to farming practice and agriculture. And so we've known them for a very long time through the natural building community, and have been working with them and doing consultation design services as they've been building out their campus. And they have grown wonderfully so, and are in need of a commercial kitchen and dining facility and programming space to be able to support the increased numbers of trainees that they have on their farm. And so we went through a process in design there on this project requirements of really naming and defining earth care, and some of the requirements in support of earth care is a core goal that is really mirrored in the work that they do. And they are an organization that really embodies the direct connection between human care and earth care, and the justice in caring for people, and the relationship with the planet in doing so. And so there's just a series of features that, for those of you in the high performance, low carbon world, will sound pretty familiar, that are sort of baked in from the owner's declaration into the building, which made it not only an easier lift to defend them, but became core requirements that the entire design and construction team need to respond to. A high performance building enclosure. In this case, you're using our strong sided panels. You can see there on the right. All heat pump driven heating and cooling, domestic hot water, using biomass backup heat, wood heat that they from their own wood management systems for in the event of grid outages. And that was part of transferring or modifying, adapting, updating, moving their campus into towards being an all electric, renewably powered campus, which they're in the process of doing. So yeah, all fossil fuel free mechanical systems, phasing out fossils off of the campus. It was really important that the indoor environmental quality and air qualities are kept really high out of respect and care for the people working in and using the facilities. So balanced ventilation, non-toxic and bio-based materials for all divisions wherever possible, and that really governed a lot of the interior finish selections. One thing that I really loved, particular to this, that really sort of elevated and made more real some of the relational aspects of this, is the prioritization on using local materials and local manufacturing and their pre-existing network of local craftsfolk whenever possible. And so a lot of design decisions were made not just because of CO2 emission level of their EPD, or based on the VOC limit on the HPD for their finish selection, but who are they working with and what materials can they get locally, and designing with those specific relationships in mind. What species of wood do they have access to? What mills are they working with? Who have they been working with for local fabricators? And that became a really, a pretty significant challenge, but also a really exciting opportunity that very much, again, centered the development of this process for this client in community and in relationship with their ecological and sort of human community. There was also an incredibly deep consideration of the site integration, particularly the utility services. Part of that was just pragmatic, trying to work this into a working farm. But a lot of this, again, was holding deep sensitivity of the impact of the built environment into their home and into the land base that is quite literally sustaining them economically and through food and shelter and water. So yeah, that was just, they just stand as a good example of an organization whose mission is so deeply aligned with and exemplary of these connections. Recognizing that we're at time, I'm going to read out these next prompts and invite you to take a screenshot of them. And then we're going to move to the last section, just so we leave enough time to sort of hit some of that last round of pieces. So the reflections we have for you to take home and practice here. The further opportunities I see in my next project to center Earth wellness are the stacked benefits that I can see for my project or my work are, and the metrics that I can use to evaluate my projects based on Earth care include. So again, encourage you to feel free to fill in those prompts and take some time after the presentation to consider what next steps you can make further along your path towards Earth care. But let's keep going to be respectful of folks' time and hit round 3. Chris, take us away.
Sure. I was just going to say, maybe because we are close to time, if folks feel like it's time to go because you have other commitments, feel free to drop off. We've gone a bit over here, so we can move on without you if need be. So I'll just quickly say the last piece that we're going to look at is thinking about scale, and this is something that comes up a lot when we talk about these types of ideas. Often in a what I find to be a bit of a sort of demeaning way, we get this like nice pat on the head, like, well, isn't that sweet that you do this kind of stuff at this small residential scale, but like we can't possibly think about how this could work on a larger scale. So we want to sort of talk a little bit about scale, and I will just jump into my little piece from Builders for Climate Action on scale. And I think it's important to recognize that a lot of innovation that happens in the built environment, but in general, starts at small scale. Like most ideas don't pop out and become mass produced things instantly. There's an idea, it germinates, it grows, and it sort of takes a path to scale. And I think when we're showing the sorts of things that we're seeing at the things we've showed you at this sort of small single building scale, that's not the be all and end all. It's part of a pathway, and often these things sort of get tried out and proved out in these smaller projects. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the BEAM tool, which is a building emissions accounting for materials. It's a free spreadsheet-based tool for looking at the carbon footprint of your buildings. And I want to use that as an example because it started literally as a tool for one project. I wanted to measured the carbon footprint of a building that we were doing at Endeavour Center, and I needed to like assemble all this information, put all this data together to, to kind of do that. And as part of that, I thought, well, it would be great to see what this looks like over a few different iterations of a building. So I kind of built a little spreadsheet tool that enabled me to do this thesis project that looked at the same building built with four different sort of suites of materials. And, the answer turned out to be pretty interesting that, at one end, a building of a certain size and scale and performance level, that was all consistent between these four examples, but it could have, a quarter of a ton of emissions per square meter, or it could store, 130 kilograms of emissions, per square meter, or land kind of anywhere in between those extremes. And that, really kind of kicked me into thinking about embodied carbon a lot, and was the start of a lot of work with Jacob and other folks in this space. But from that, from that small start, that tool for one project, my plan wasn't to build Beam. My plan was to do something for myself to do this project. But as people got interested in the answers, interested in the process of how I came up with the answers, people were asking me, well, how did you do that? And what tool did you use? And that, really was the encouragement to build Beam out, to make it free, which, there's not much of a business case for putting all the time and effort it takes to make a tool and then not sell it. But it was, really important, in the context of all of this, that the information be free, that it embed, the kind of alternative and carbon storing materials that I didn't find in other tools, and that it, it was made as widely available as possible. And then if you want to jump to the next one, and very much by word of mouth and by, people's interest, a tool that was just supposed to do one project for me. This says 1,700 users. It's up over 2,500 users now, being used by designers and builders. It's been used as a tool for studies to set policy. The CLFBC and ZEBEC folks have been part of the project in Vancouver, where there's a really great innovative program to encourage low embodied carbon construction that was sort of built on the back of Beam. NRCan here in Canada has a version of the tool that helps energy advisors be able to do embodied carbon analysis. So, the sort of the case for scale here is that, you don't have to start with an idea or a plan that something has to be a certain size to have impact. You can do the thing that needs doing, and it can grow quite quickly, but also quite organically, to the point where, it does achieve a certain level of scale. And, I see that the interest in these tools is sort of increasing at a really great rate. And it's really exciting to see that an idea that had no concept of scale at first, was not interested in scale, is scaling, and having quite an impact. So I'll turn it over to you.
I love it. One little thing I'll add as a practitioner and consultant researcher, I've been delighted to find really good application for Beam in multiple phases when doing climate impact consulting on even buildings at larger scale, the 20 to 60,000 square foot range. So yeah, just to build off that point, Chris, the opportunities of scale and access for even smaller endeavors can be surprising, and these fabulous opportunities to take advantage of. And that's actually a decent segue into, I'm going to talk about the panels again, but in this case, in the context of scale. And so, our initial forays into this were really to address the fact that our best attempts at workforce development to get more people working with straw and more tradesfolk with assemblies were just simply not gaining enough traction. It's hard enough to find anyone in the carpentry field in general, let alone folks that are willing to learn how to build with straw. And so for us, it's very much pivoting there. How can we expand this work further beyond the capacity of one building a year, or a couple of buildings a year for our one crew? That was a really big motivation for us. And what's been really delightful is to see how we've been able to play with the concept of scale in a number of different ways, because the sort of the conventional logic of the market would say, okay, well, the next move is to generate, somewhere between $5 and $50 million of investment, and build an up to scale manufacturing facility that can deliver these cheaply at volume to projects all across the Northeast, and that would be the next logical move. And that just really did not match much of what we've been talking about thus far in terms of the systems and structures that we've been sort of buying into, how that would change our company, how that changed the relationships we have with each other and with our resource base, so on and so forth. And so, like, all right, what's the mechanism here for us to play with scale in different ways? And what's been really exciting is to see there's sort of a couple of levels of that we've been able to identify. One is, as we started building these little cabanitas, these little cottages that were initially designed specifically as an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, or a sort of infill housing, that type of approach, as our region is facing a tremendous pause in the screen share. Let me just get that screen share working again. I'm not sure what happened there, pardon me. That was a surprising interruption. All right, here we go. It turned into a combination of applications that from one little ADU into not only just accessory dwelling units, but we're now looking at a couple of projects in which this can be brought together in some pocket communities and clustered housing, as well as seeing how far the sort of prefab small building approach, not unlike what Chris was sharing with the Zero House in the last round, can be leveraged to be more of a modular approach for multi-unit construction, and having seen those projects be another approach to scale that doesn't require a level of development that makes it accessible to companies of our size, but also allows us to stay at our size by intentionally developing a manufacturing approach that is very low capitalization. It costs very little for us to set up this process and to be able to start turning out panels within a year's time. And now we are in conversation with a series of different companies that are similar in looking to find some panelized and offsite prefabricated approaches to construction that are similarly not going to develop a multi-million-dollar manufacturing facility, but are very interested in supplying their communities with similar accessibility to these types of materials without having to burden the cost burden of custom construction. So now that we're looking at something of a movement building, of sort of horizontally spreading a low barrier to access technology across a series of small cooperatives and companies that can mobilize together to address how manufacturing can be done and how housing solutions can be provided in a coordinated movement type approach that doesn't necessarily require some of the compromises to the integrity of the relationships that we see when having to grow in economies of scale.
I don't know whether this was your words, Deva, or not, but faced with the questions of scale, I think you were the one that said sort of replicability versus scalability, and we always think of scale as, now we need a mega factory that makes 1 million of these, versus, I think what we're talking about here is what we might actually need is, 1,000 little factories that make, 1,000 of these, or however the math works out to be equivalent. But, exactly. that notion that it doesn't have to be monster to be scalable. It can also be replicable, and replicable a lot in smaller versions, rather than, we're going to have one mega straw wall factory in Nebraska that ships to all corners of the country.
That's exactly right. Thanks for bringing that word, that replicability as a mechanism for scale development. And right now we're actually in conversation with a series of other straw panel producers in our region to figure out how can we coordinate our manufacturing processes to be able to provide panels to larger, larger multi-unit, mid-sized developments, not by needing to match that scale in our manufacturing, but by replicating our efforts and coordinating as sort of a cooperative movement, which gets very exciting from the economic side of things. So thank you all. Oh, so let's look at those last prompts. Again, given that we're a bit over time, we won't pause any further, but just we would encourage you to take, again, 2 minutes, 120 seconds out of your life to answer one of these prompts. The opportunities I see to increase the scale and impact of my work include resources I can use to increase my potential and reach are steps that I can take to more intentionally align with the climate justice movement include. So thank you for being with us and for being willing to think outside of the box and go a little bit beyond the sort of do less harm model of our work and really lean in further into how we actually do some healing of people and planet in the process of decarbonizing our environment. Really appreciate your attention and your time.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks Caroline and crew for the opportunity to present this today.
Thank you so much for coming along. I really appreciated that. And judging by the chat, I think a lot of people really enjoyed the presentation here today. So thank you very much to both of you for joining. I thought it was really inspirational, and I have lots of things that I need to go away and think about.